Troublemaker, a Dave Brandstetter mystery. Book 3. Author, Joseph Hansen. Publisher, Open Road Media. Narrator, Eric Ost. This one is dedicated to Ken Thompson. Chapter 2. She didn't answer, and he went down broken flag steps between terraced beds, where wild oats, passion vines, sunflowers choked out iris carnations, nasturtiums, and where fat white roses strewed cakered petals from neglected canes. A lizard scuttled ahead of dimmed down the mossy passage between house and guest house and lost itself in a rattle of dry leaves among flower pots where leggy geraniums withered. She'd gardened last year. There must have been fewer horses then. The guest house doors had square glass panes, a reed blind on the inside. He turned the knob, which was faceted, paint-speckled glass, and went in. Richard Wendell had used lumberyard bargain birch paneling on the walls, modular shelves had stereo equipment, a portable television set, a slide projector, records, books, stacks of magazines. The carpeting was mottled blue-green, so were the curtains. At the room's near end, basket chairs faced a fireplace. At the far end, a blue couch looked at windows that framed ferns and the trunks of big pines. The windows stood open. They had square panes, too, and went out on hinges and stayed out by means of long rods hooked through eyes dense with old paint. The screens were on the inside. A little light desk backed the couch. Next to the desk, the carpet had been scrubbed and was still wet. Papers littered the desk. There were bills, subscription blanks, an opened, gaudy advertisement for a book about Renaissance Italy, with off-register reproductions of famous paintings. Blue Kleenex poked up out of a wooden housing meant to hide the box. A ballpoint pen stamped in cheap gilt. The hang 10 lay by a brown envelope. On the back of the envelope, somebody had worked arithmetic problems, taking percentages of 25,000. Heather Wendell must have sat here last night, sweating out her prospects at a passbook 5.25%. She'd about be able to feed the horses. He opened a shallow center drawer, stamps, paper clips, rubber bands, a dress label in a little plastic box, pencils, more of the souvenir pens. He opened side drawer left, envelopes, writing paper, an address book in fake leather. He lifted these out. Underneath was a scatter of little Kodachrome slides. He held one up to the light, naked boys in a basic sex position. He tried some others, same boys, but the positions changed. He dropped them back and laid the stationery on them. The address book had letter tabs along the page edges. He picked the letter J. There were 3 names that meant nothing to him, but at the bottom of the page were 2 numbers unattached to any name. One had been scratched out. He looked for a telephone. It crouched on a low shelf by a cluster of brown glazed clay pots. Handsome, the kind that came out of local kilns. The kind Doug Sawyer's new shop was waist deep in. Most of those had been thrown by a lank, bushy-haired youth named Kovacs. Dave shrugged. Kovacs away. He was going to mean trouble, but he wasn't trouble yet, and right now Dave had work to do. He dialed the number. It rang once, and the connection opened with a crash, and dogs barked into his ear. He flinched and held the receiver away. A girl's voice scolded the dogs and yelped, "Hello!" The dogs kept barking. The girl called, "Will you please get them out of here?" Someone swore. The dogs barked. A door slammed. Silence. Dave asked, "To whom am I speaking?" "To whom did you want to speak?" Quick, sweet, and weary. This wasn't some kid he could con information out of. He'd better cut his losses. "Larry Johns," he said. "I'm sorry. He's not here now." Dave felt himself grin. The only address the Los Santos police had for Larry Johns was off his driver's license, a cheap hotel in Brownsville, Texas. The kind of place that didn't know where you'd come from or where you'd go, especially not if it was the law asking. Where Larry Johns had gone was, of course, Los Santos, a quiet town that clambered the tree-green oceanside hills northwest of L.A. But small as it was, Los Santos had thousands of street numbers, and Larry Johns wasn't telling which was his. Why didn't seem to interest Lieutenant Tech Yoshiba. It interested Dave. He said carefully, "When do you expect him?" She did it again, answered a question with a question, sweetly. "Who's calling, please?" He told her, and she asked him to wait, and he waited, watching a blue jay hammer a pine cone on a rock outside the windows. Then someone picked up an extension. The male voice said, "What about insurance? I've got insurance. I'm collecting on it right now." "I'm not selling it," Dave said. "I'm trying to reach Larry Johns. Does he live there?" There were 5 dead seconds. "How the hell did you get this number?" Back of him, women exchanged loud words in a place that echoed, heels clacked. Dave said, "It's in Richard Wendell's book." "Oh, Christ," the man groaned. Then he said sharply, "No, Gail, wait." And a female spoke into the phone, not the one who'd answered first with the dogs. This voice was older. "You have the wrong number," it said, and the receiver slammed. But only on the extension. On the other phone, he heard remote man-woman shouts. Then the dogs barked again. The heels neared the connection. Broke. He hung up. He'd lapped his jacket over the back of the desk chair. Out of it, he dug a small notebook and checked a number he kept there. Dialing it got him Ray Lillard at the central office, a Pacific telephone. Lillard was a plump, feminine man who collected antiques and had been a friend of Rod Fleming, a decorator Dave used to live with, who had died last fall. Rod had restored an old mansion, porches, cupolas, stained glass on West Adams for Lillard. It was a showplace. "Davy!" Lillard sounded pleased, but he always sounded pleased. "I keep thinking we'll run into each other at Romano's." He meant the West Los Angeles restaurant where they'd met in 1948. "But it seems you don't eat these days." Rod always said you'd starve to death if he didn't remind you. "But of course, that's how you keep that elegant figure." "Oh, we'll set a date," Dave said. "Listen, Ray, find out who owns this number. He gave it. If you can get it for me in, say, 10 minutes, call me back here." He read Richard Wendell's number off the dial plaque. "Pleasure," Lillard said. "How are you? How's Doug? Happy? The new gallery flourishing, is it?" "He's lonely," Dave said. "Try to get around there, will you? None of it's old, but he's got some really beautiful stuff, and he needs customers." "I gather you don't lack for customers." People keep dying," Dave said. "Look, if I don't hear from you, I'll get back to you later. I don't know just where I'm headed." Lillard said something amiable that amounted to nothing. So did Dave. He hung up and went back to the desk, frowning. The envelope with the figure on it was tough and bulky. He turned it over. Security Bank, 132, Pier Street, Los Santos, was in the upper left-hand corner. That was all. No addressee. It hadn't gone through any mail, and it wasn't quite empty inside. His fingers found 3 paper straps, each with $500, rubber stamped on it. He glanced at the phone, but he didn't have a friend at Security Bank's central office. He'd have to go through channels. He tucked the straps into a jacket pocket. The right-hand desk drawer was an indifferent shambles of canceled checks, paid bills, tax forms, wish you were here postcards, snapshots. He thumbed through these. Most were the surreal horse and a harlequin Great Dane. A couple caught Heather Wendell sitting the horse or holding the dog's leash. Here was a big, grinning young man leaning against a car, as that ski sweater had suggested. A giant at the back of the drawer were red, silver, and blue rosetted ribbons. Los Santos Dog Show. 1950s and 1960s. On the bottom of the drawer lay a yellowing 8x10 glossy of a dark, curly-haired little youth in boxing trunks. He scowled about raised fists that were wrapped in gauze. Across the picture's lower corner, an ungifted penman had written, "To Rick, all my love, Ace." Dave laid the picture back and covered it up again with the wasted paper of Rick Wendell's life. Suits, pants, jackets off the extra-large rack hung in the bedroom closet. Big towels lay wadded on the checkered board tiles of the bathroom floor. The shower dripped behind a plastic curtain. The bed was a scrimmage of creased sheets. The blankets had half fallen to the floor. By the head of the bed was an 8mm projector with reels on it. Facing the bed foot, a spring roller screen glittered on a metal tripod. Dave drew the blue-green curtains across the windows and flipped the projector switch. On the screen, boys naked except for cowboy hats, gun belts, and tooled boots had sex with each other on what looked like a Baja beach. Some such place. Sweat stuck sand to their pale city skins. They acted bored. Dave snapped off the projector, opened the curtains, walked around the bed, looking at the floor. A comb, a leather packet of keys, a dime, and 2 pennies, and a pair of jockey shorts. He picked them up, size 32. No giants. He dropped them, and something changed. The light in the room. He looked at the door. A giant stood there, a big, boned old man. His thick gray hair needed cutting. His cheap suit needed pressing. The white shirt, the black tie looked as if they'd just been bought, though, and he'd used a lot of polish to fill the cracks in the uppers of his shoes. Dave smelled shinola. The man's eyes were pouchy, and the skin over his cheekbones and nose was a river map of small, broken veins. But a carefully tended mustache said he'd been vain enough once. He asked, "Who are you?" "Brandstetter," Dave said. "Medallion Life." He held out his hand. The man folded in a grip that had long ago given up trying to hold on to anything. "This is the Wendell house, isn't it?" He licked dry, cracked lips, and his bloodshot eyes fidgeted around the room, looking for something, a drink probably. "Yes, it's the Wendell house," Dave said. "I'm trying to find out what happened here." "Thought the police had the son of a bitch locked up." The man turned back into the living room. Dave rounded the bed and went after him. He was opening cabinet doors below the modular shelving. He found a bottle and glasses. "Join me." He lifted them at Dave. "I'm Billy Wendell, Rick's father. I don't think he'd mind his old man having a blast, do you?" "It's a little late to ask him," Dave said. "Don't you know?" "Hadn't seen him for a while." Wendell poured 3 thick fingers into a glass and handed it to Dave, and poured 5 for himself and set the bottle down. "His mother and I weren't speaking." He jerked his long jaw up in silent ironic laughter. "Not for some years." He drank, studied his glass, looked at it. "Dave, insurance, huh? That's a good racket. I was in it once." He made an unamused sound and drank again. "I was in about everything once, but it's been used cards lately." "Lately?" "Last 20 years. Now it's dying under me." "You don't need a gas hog, do you?" He handed Dave a card. Looked him up and down. "You don't look like money. Gives you bad dreams." "I drive a company car," Dave said. "You've come back for the funeral, right?" Wendell nodded. His voice went to pieces. Tears leaked down his face. "My boy, my only son. Jesus. Least I could do. Poor kid, not 40 years old yet, and some crazy pervert murders him." He wagged his head. "The one thing I could be a little bit proud of. Fine son." He gulped the last of his drink. "Sure," Dave said. "How did you find out about it? Your wife write to you?" "Hell, she wouldn't know where to reach me. No. I saw it on television. The Times was where I got the address. Had to look sharp to find it. Guess there are too many murders anymore for it to be news." "There were always too many," Dave said. "You live in L.A. then?" "Torrance," Billy Wendell said, "if you could call it living." He set down the glass where it would make a mark in the finish. "Is there a bathroom?" Dave jerked his head. Wendell went out, moving his long legs as if they pained him. Dave checked his watch, looked at the phone. It didn't ring. He tasted the whiskey, walked to the bottle and turned it so the label showed. Right, they didn't cart this in by the truckload for the bar. He rummaged his jacket for a cigarette, lit it with a narrow steel butane, lighter, and the scuff of clumsy shoes outside turned his head toward the door. Heather Wendell stopped there, the withering geraniums flaring red behind her. You see, Mr. Brandstetter, I know about death. It's not the dead we ought to mourn for. It's the living. When my father died, his troubles were over. Mine had only started. I was 25, a grown woman, but he'd sheltered me like a child. I'd never had to lift a hand. Everything I needed or imagined I needed was given me. Then suddenly it was all taken away. I had nothing and a 3-year-old boy to raise. You had a husband, Dave said. She shook her head. When the money stopped, he left. He was no better equipped to face reality than I was. It was no surprise to me. The corner of her mouth tightened in a kind of smile. Do you know how I managed? By doing for a living exactly what you found me doing this morning. Cleaning stables, grooming horses. Horses were all I knew. Then came the war and the aircraft factories. They hired women because women were what there were to hire, whether they knew anything or not. I bucket rivets for 4 years. The crooked smile tried itself again and failed. Well, you don't want to hear the rest. I don't want to remember it. At last, Rick took hold, and my nightmare was over. Her shoulders lifted a little as if shedding the weight all over again. Naturally, if I'd had my choice, it wouldn't have been the kind of business it was, but I didn't have any choice, did I? Come to think of it, never once in my life did I choose. The toilet flushed. She frowned puzzlement at the bedroom door. Dave picked up his drink and tasted it again, and Billy Wendell came in, zipping a fly that didn't work well. He stopped, blinked. Heather, he said heavily. She squinted, head craning forward. Billy? She took a step into the room, a hand half held out. Dear God, what's happened to you? Happened? He said. I'm 65 years old. I'm sorry, she said. It's such a shock is all. Where'd you come from? She looked at him, grieved. Not far. He made for his glass like a drowning man for a piece of driftwood. He gulped from it, wiped his mustache with the back of his hand. You want a drink? It's your booze. You mean you've been close by? She didn't say it angry. She said it sad. And never came around, never shown your face? I didn't know where you'd got to. He bent creakily for another glass. Not till I read about Rick in the paper. He dumped whiskey into the glass, set the bottle by, carried the glass to her. You landed on your feet. Pleasant place here. Nice furnishings. He tilted his head. Portrait of you on the wall in there with a big dog. He looked her up and down as she'd done Dave, smiled to himself as he walked back to put more whiskey into this glass. He was wasting a beautiful bottle in a hurry. Horses again, huh? You know, he drank. I'm happy about that. I was afraid you'd never have them anymore. Costs a lot of money to keep horses. You worried about me? What she wanted in her smile was disbelief, but her damp eyes showed she was touched. I worried about you, Billy. You had a right, he grunted back to her. He opened the top magazine in a stack on a shelf. Dave caught a glimpse of naked male bodies in color. Billy Wendell shut the magazine fast. He turned to face his wife. I didn't land on my feet. Charm and good looks weren't in a seller's market in those days. By the time they were, I was an old wreck. No, she protested gently. Ah, Billy, there's so much to talk about. She glanced back at the open door of the morning light. Will you come with me to the stable up the hill? Dave said. In a minute, Mrs. Wendell. He picked up his jacket, dug out the flattened paper straps. These were in that empty envelope on the desk from the bank. He laid them in her hand. What do they mean? Where's the 1,500? She frowned at the straps, then at him. 15? She paled, then reddened. That damn boy! He was naked, remember, Dave said, and took back the straps. Each of these held $20 bills. They'd make a huge bulge, even if he'd had pockets. Then she looked at her hand as if surprised to find the glass there. She drank from it. Her blue eyes on Dave's were uncertain. It must have gone with Rick to the bar, of course. Out of the envelope, Dave said. Obviously, she said. All right. Dave shrugged into the jacket. Thanks for your help. He went to the desk for the envelope, tucked the straps into it, held it up. I'll take this if it won't inconvenience you. For a moment she looked doubtful, then she shrugged. Why not? Why not? Billy Wendell said, loudly, but to himself, rattling bottle against glass, then softly, Why not? That's what I say. What does anything matter now? Rick's dead. My son's dead. He turned toward his wife, and the tears were streaming now. Billy! Billy! She went toward him with her arms held out, big, strong arms. He'd made a mistake ever to leave. They embraced him, held him. Dave went out into the sun. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.